start that conversation, we invite questions. Sue or Liz, comments, responses?
I'm curious about the role of the matriarch and of the mother or the auntie or this maternal figure that I see in, for example, this one in this room, that auntie role is just like something I've never encountered before, and that potential as both a teacher and having a maternal role and kind of nurturing the fostering of connection and information sharing, utilising that very beautiful, unique, strong, powerful thing that is that kind of maternal elder.
That's really interesting. Trying to think that's quite a complex issue.
Yeah.
One of the things so we have a number of, traditionally, we have a whole range of roles that were determined by role rather than gender, determined by what needed to be done. Okay? So we have that. And then we also have quite specific things that Māori women did and Māori men did, and these kind of relationships that we have. And a lot of that's been really disrupted by the kind of heteronormative, colonial, patriarchal, domesticated nuclear family model. I talked about this quite a lot yesterday. Because as a fundamental model, it has really disrupted some of our the underpinnings of our kinship relationships, of what we call our whanaungatanga relationships. And so when I think about, so I write a lot around what we would call mana wahine, so the position and status and role of wahine Māori, so Māori woman is one way of defining that. But it's not in the same gendered way that colonialism talks about. Yeah. So, I think we've got a lot of work to do in that, but I also think that we have some really inherent ancestral memories and knowledges that come, that enable us to continue these relationships across Indigenous women, across, whether it's matriarchal, I'm not sure what the term is. But I know that for me, in my role within my own whānau, so whānau is like your extended family relationship. There are multiple roles that we have. So, and it's in the language. I mean, I really want to pick up on the point Sue made about the more deeply knowledgeable of languages we become, of our own languages. We see things that are about roles and how we fit in the world. Our positionality becomes clearer. And that's one thing we really talk a lot about, is how do you position yourself? How do you locate yourself? How do you see yourself in relationship? Because everything is relational in our worldview. Everything is about whanaungatanga, the embedding and the strengthening of relationships. And so, again, something like co-production, it's not about making something together, it's about forging relationships that enable us to make things together. And so the relationship is more important than anything else. But as I sit here as a tupuna wahine, so a grandmother. I said yesterday the word tupuna means tu is to stand, puna is like a fountain of water, right? And so that is what the term we use for a grandparent or an ancestor, a tupuna. So I'm a grandmother, I'm a tupuna wahine. But I'm also a granddaughter, so I'm a mokopuna. And moko is this, these are moko. So the images are, representations of spring. So as a grandchild, I'm a representation of my ancestor. I'm the living, walking representation of my ancestor. And my mokopuna are the living, walking representation of me, and actually they are. I watch them, I'm like, oh, right. But I'm also a tuakana, so I'm an elder sibling to my younger sisters. I'm a tuahine, which means I'm a sister to my brothers. I'm a taina because I'm the younger sister of an elder sister. See what I mean? I'm a whaia, which means that I'm a woman who cares for others. That can be a mother or an auntie. So the word mother and auntie is the same word in Māori language. Whaia. Whaia is your mother, and then whaia is your auntie. And it doesn't have to be biological. Because we go into immersion schools, all the kids will call me whaia. Yeah. And I will talk to them as if I'm their mother, especially when they need to change their behaviour. You know, so it's like even when we think about those things and the role of a woman and even with the notion of maternal ways of being, really different for us in terms of how we think about the role of birthing children and rearing children, because actually mothers and fathers did not raise the children. Their grandparent generation would raise children. So I think we have to think carefully when we think about notions around maternal ways of being, because we're being told that this is what women do, when actually often that's what our men did. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of complexities. We could talk a long time about it.
Is the concept of fountain, is that also used with grandfathers, or is there something different?
It's the same.
It's really nice.
Yeah, it's the same.
Well, without repeating what you just said, because it is the mirror image here. In my role, currently and previously, the difficulty is the disruption that's happened, and then quite often I'm in a role where I'm, teaching people who are more senior than me, and not recognised within the Western system that way. And so it's quite often I can find at times really hard to speak, because the person that I'm supposed to be teaching or mentoring or whatever term it is the person who really has the role of caring for me. And so it's a really difficult place to be at the moment in balancing all of that up and in trying to work through that. The best that I can come to it, and it's certainly not what's comfortable at this point, but the best I can come to is that my job is as the helper to get them the recognition that they need from this system to be able to do what they need to do. But it puts us in a really not conflictual, because that's not the right word, but it puts me in a position where I feel like I'm not meeting my cultural obligations because I have to operate in this system. But it's, I'm not certain if I'm explaining it right. But that whole colonial disruption to our relationships, and it's not that the relationships are broken, it's just that the way that they're functioning is not always the right way. But sometimes we have to work with that to get to the bigger picture or to where we need to be.
That's a really good point. I remember being in a situation teaching a master's program with Graham Smith, and him deciding to go away for a week, and sitting in this room with 20 Māori, pretty much all elders in education, who were fluent in the language and had been around for a long time, and my knees were physically knocking under me. I was just totally freaked out. So in the end, I said to them, I'm really freaked out. I don't even know why I'm here doing this with all of you, given, that's what I said to them. And we just came to an agreement. They said, well, we're going to have the sharing experience. So you are here to help us get our degree, and we're here to help you learn some of the things you need to learn. And once we determined that relationship, we were all good. But all the way through, I was calling them mother and father the whole way, papa, matua, which is a father or an uncle, and whaia. So I was, so we had to work out a different way of being in the relationship. And that's a really good learning for someone like, who's maybe a new academic, particularly Indigenous. Those forging of those cultural relationships in a different context and how they work themselves out. And I think it's also a really good research relationship to think about. Because I've seen a number of, say, contexts where research projects will have what we call a kaumātua advisory, so an elder advisory team, right? But they only call them in when they've got an issue. They don't actually have really meaningful relationships with these elders advisory committees unless they've got something they need someone else to help them solve. Well, actually, that's not a particularly rewarding way for anyone to have a relationship. And so, just really thinking around those things. I just wanted to back up to the woman's question too, in terms of, because something I'm reminded of all of the time, every visit that I'm here, is that notion of woman's business, and you've been Sue's been talking about it a lot. And that I'm constantly thinking, what happened in the colonial process where those forms of ceremony for Māori women have been removed. And so we've got a lot of focus now on remembering what those spaces were for us, and what were the ceremonies for us. So women's ceremonies and men's ceremonies. And they've been so deeply, disrupted that we're having to really go very deep in terms of trying to reconnect those things. There are some things we've held on to very well, but there are other things that, we really have to find the knowledge holders who have that. And one of them is thinking about our relationship to land. The burying thing, it seems a morbid thing, but actually, one of our major ceremonies in the Māori world is tangi, when we bury people, when we put people to rest. That's 5 days, 3 to 5 days of ceremony in that mourning process. That's one thing we've held to. And I think that enables us to deal with grief in a particular way. And I think it also gives us a model for healing grief that, we've managed somehow to hold on to. But relationship to land, we have a term, I think I talked a little bit about yesterday, a term ukaipo, when we talk about land. Ukaipo actually means the breastfeeding in the night. U is breast, kai is food, po is night. So breastfeeding in the night. So when we refer to the earth as our ukaipo, we're referring to it as the place that sustains us. So when you go home, you go to your ukaipo. And so that relationship between the earth and woman is very clearly connected in that way. But there's a lot of things that we have to remember. And I agree with the point around the historical intergenerational trauma. But one thing is that, we need to start talking more about that impact, in terms of the real impact of historical intergenerational, and be able to track that. And so we've been doing some work in that area around sexual violence, and there's with 5 Māori providers or service providers that work in the field, have been in the field for, from the beginning, for years and years and years. But there's hundreds of years of experience in these providers. And they wanted us to look at the issue of sexual violence impact on Māori from a historical colonial trauma lens. And so, in doing that, what we know is the way in which that is manifested in material ways and in ways of living, but also how it's manifested in wairua or spiritual ways and ways of being. And that trauma is both a physical manifestation and a spiritual manifestation in terms of how it impacts on us. And so what we've been trying to do is then think about the other side of that, is that actually we know that if trauma is passed in this way, so are other deep ancestral memories that are healing memories. So when we've done this work, it's actually led to this work, which actually we need to focus on how do we draw on those memories as healing memories, and how do we reconnect to the healing memories that we carry. And it's, it's really, I think, we do need to think about those things. And for me, it comes up in visiting places and never having been there, but I know I've been there. Or doing things that no one ever told me to do as a Māori person. But I just know how to do it. Or feeling uncomfortable as I walk my own territory on a piece of land and then finding out that's actually where a particular event occurred. So we walk around land without even knowing, in our country, without even knowing what happened on that land. And we're picking up the spirit of that land as we walk it. And then we carry it in our lives. So one of the things is understanding our history. We have a right to know our history and all of the depth of our history. So we're in a big scrap at the moment, with the Ministry of Education, who won't do compulsory Māori language and who won't do compulsory Māori history. And so that's really, it's raging at home at the moment. Because actually embedded in that knowledge is a whole lot of other knowledge that comes with it. I don't know where it's going. But this is, for me, this is all part of translation. Understanding where we are, whose land we're on, what happened on the land, what the relationships are. What's our role in trying to get the land returned to its original peoples, original nations? Because actually, for me, well-being for Māori is connected to well-being of our land and is around our reconnection to this.
I've got another question, unless someone... as far as tools to create collaboration, I don't come from a social science background, but I was a chef for a long time. And I've got this idea for a paper on cake as a way of producing creativity and collaboration. And something that I've found is that if you try and address a problem face on, it can be really hard and really confronting. Whereas if there's cake there, nothing's very hard, right? Because cake's good, everyone likes cake, right? So you can talk about things that would be hard if the cake wasn't there.
Is it gluten-free?
It depends. You work too hard.
Not gluten-free.
But what I'm talking about is the use of, and it kind of plays into the maternal thing too, but the use of traditional handicrafts or feeding people or creating a space that utilises something that people feel comfortable with and that are used to doing, like preparing food or, in white culture quilting circles or all those things that are traditionally a way of sharing information where it's safe, it's not confronting, and using that kind of platform as a collaborative tool, as a conduit.
Yes.
Thank you.
If you invite everyone in to talk about the really hard stuff, people aren't comfortable. But if you open up a space where people can talk about what they need to talk about, then things start coming to the surface. And, in some ways, the language program, and maybe you want to say something about this, Deb, about how in the language program there's a lot of healing that happens. And so when we start off, you see these little difficulties bubbling to the surface, and sometimes people don't behave in the correct way because it's all the trauma that's coming, that has to come out before people can start healing. And through my own experience of that course, I watched Deb very excellently, for want of a better word, actually manage that. And so there are various roles people play within the language course that doesn't always see them up front, but they're at the back of the room, and I watch Deb and I watch Brother Harry, and they just sort of hover in the background very quietly, and they watch what's happening. And when they need to, they go and sit beside someone or take someone out. But I'm still talking. Deb, do you want to say something about this?
No, not really. I'm looking for Lloyd. I guess that when you were talking about remembering, I know our other language teacher that teaches with Lloyd and Harry, Letitia, she always talks about remembering now. Remember me, Aunt, you know, like sure there'll be something really profound. And there's this beautiful stuff with, where's Lloyd?
Is that
There's, you know, with that, you know, this, within the structure of the language is the rules for how to live. So when people reconnect with language, they reconnect with how to live a proper way of life. You know, and I mean, the practice theorists are really clear now on, you know, that education should make me a good individual and it should make me a good citizen of the planet. So if I'm, you know, think I'm being a good person, but I'm not being responsible and caring for country, then I haven't been educated properly. And I often say to Uncle Stan Grant, who's been, you know, wanting to retire for so long and keeps handing over the reins, that he brings so much into that classroom because it's his cultural knowledge and wisdom and his legitimacy that he carries. And the students are now, we thought we were going to have to do a road trip and, you know, get a few students to sign up, and all of a sudden the course was full. Because the word's out there with the students, if you want to study, study while Uncle Stan's still around. Because it's that beautiful, it's from this land, you know, it's how to live here, it's how, and that's what First Nations Australia can teach non-Indigenous Australians, you know. How do you live where you are? How do you be responsible for the generations yet to come? And they're the kinds, so this course Sue's talking about, that Sue and Lloyd teach on and teach and Harry, it's only 4 subjects in a grade cert, and the transformation is remarkable. Truly, truly remarkable. You know, and we often, I mean, Lloyd's just incredible. He's really generous, you know, there's often people in tears and there's the intergenerational trauma and all this processing. But over the time, it's the family and how these guys, we've got some students here, how these guys all look after each other. And they also look after us because we muck up quite regularly. But there's a big family. The university don't understand when the staffing timetable goes in because there's so many people who might come, they might be getting paid for 7 hours over that whole residential, over the whole intensive. So, but people come and they stay there because it's just the most incredible space to be in, and we're very lucky that we've actually got a Vice-Chancellor who gets that it's important. And he's recently quoted as saying it's been the highlight of his career as a Vice-Chancellor at this university to support this course, because we need that institutional support. You know, in that Habermas way, he talks about systems. Systems can constrain or they can enhance our life world. We're lucky enough at this point in time, between the Wiradjuri elders and the community-spirited leaders and this institution, been able to carve out the space, and then we've got incredible staff. Here he is. Well, wasn't he? I don't know if the students I don't know if the students want to say something while Lloyd's just talking about, Lloydie, about the power of the 4 subjects and the power of language in people's lives, you know, the transformation, the healing that happens in that space.
But I think it's key to, you know, what Leonie was talking about. So in terms of when you actually delve into the language, and it actually guides your actions. So for example, we talk about it, we always talk about it to the students, that in language, there's no way in Wiradjuri language can you change the past. So when you talk about the past, you can learn from it, but you certainly can't change it. So I was talking last week to some students at La Trobe in mentoring. And so one of the interesting things is saying, when you're working with students and you can't sit there and, so language doesn't allow it to go, oh, but you know, when you went out drinking that night, if you did this and if you did that, how do you think that would have changed? But when you do it in language, it doesn't allow you to do that. You can't do that if, buts, and maybes, because you can't change it. And, you know, we also then talk about and saying the future's always talked about impossibilities, never certainties, so there's no words to talk about in uncertainties. And when we talk about relationships and identity, that's the language itself, and including the language is talked about in how everything relates. And in language, we can't directly compare 2 things. So those words, you know, the smarter, the stronger, the faster, there's no words in our language that allows you to do that. Each person each identity has to be talked about in terms of their own relationships, their own qualities. So in terms of learning kids, where kids are taught, Mary's smarter than John, Sue's quicker. Well, our language doesn't allow us to do that because that's not paying really the respect to every individual in their own qualities. And so that's what the students are learning about in the course as well, about how to live that way in terms of our language and our thinking.
Honey, Cheryl, or Tanea, or Alicia, any comments from any in relation to what Lloyd just said, or being a student? Oh.
Patricia.
Sorry, I've just been at another meeting. I think it's really important for people to come and do the language course. We've taken back what was taken from us, and it's changed my whole life. So the way that I look at things, for me, the 7 generations thinking, if we all thought that way, how we could have a better life for our families and our communities by thinking about what we teach today and how it's going to impact on 7 generations. I think it's a really powerful thing, and we can make this change ourselves. So I think it's really important that if you can come and do the course, that you come. You meet some really great people that have the same, think that same way. So, and it not only just builds yourself, but it's building our Wiradjuri nation.
Can I ask a question, Lloyd? I'd be really interested, or everybody, what do you think of white people doing the language?
I got no problems with it.
Okay,
The elders,
no,
but elders have no problems with it because that's one of the things I made clear around Wiradjuri language, and when the Council of Elders made that decision that anybody that wanted to learn could learn. And one of the issues they also then raised, because when that meeting took place, a couple of the elders actually looked at it and said, but if we're going to exclude non-Wiradjuri people, well, hang on, you're going to exclude my daughter. And as the mother of my grandchildren, she's not going to learn a language, so how can she pass that on to my grandchildren and be excluded? So they thought about it in those terms as well, not just about the fact that a race thing. Again, it was about what's the relationship. Yeah. And even the ones that, and non-Aboriginal people that come and do the course, it's about their relationship and what role they can actually play. And so they end up talking about the difference between Wiradjuri citizen and a citizen of Wiradjuri. And so they're saying, as a citizen of Wiradjuri nation, what's our role in determining those relationships and the nation as well. So.
It usually always comes for the job, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I was watching, I think it was Australian Story last night with Jack Thompson, and he said when Mundaway made him a brother, he said, I know this comes with a job. So 30 years later, he's still giving back to that community. So we have a lot of debates. I'm non-Wiradjuri, I'm Barkatji, so I'm born and bred from Western New South Wales in the outback. And I'm very conscious of my role as a non-Wiradjuri person, and particularly paranoid about empowering and lifting others, and that we absolutely need to know when to step back and when we're disempowering people. And I think that we actually, I find that Lloyd's incredible because there's a lot of trauma that the non-Indigenous students go through in that class. And Lloyd spends a lot of time counselling the non-Indigenous students because as blackfellas we know where we belong. And a lot of the students who are really strong in themselves really are going through really deep trauma about Australia's history and about why it had to be like this and where their place is in it. So it's usually fairly well managed. We've thought about, making sure it's predominantly Wiradjuri people, and that's why we try to get out on communities and lobby and spend a lot of time talking to community. We don't want just the apparently successful school-educated, university-educated people. We're really conscious we want to heal and transform all our communities in the way Auntie Cheryl's talking about. There's beautiful concepts around the healing and transformation in language, and somehow that seems to happen, doesn't it, Anna?
Can I make a tiny comment? I'll never forget Ross Chambers, who is our old MSc academic, talking about the language course and saying it's the only course in all his years where there's more people at the end than started at the beginning because of that relationship and how you draw people in. He said it's just incredible, year after year you get a certain number enrolling, and then by the end there's more people finishing than started, and that how incredible that is. It's a real testimony.
So this young lady here is a plant scientist, so guess what?
I just want to add a very funny conversation that I had with Lloyd about this, and him talking about non-Indigenous people during the course. And he said, in three points, like, they're just a bit needy.
They are.
Basically, as people learn language, they're able to say things. Wiradjuri people learning language for the first time are able to say things that they've never been able to say. And they have this epiphany, and so people that aren't Wiradjuri see this happening and realise that they're never going to have that connection to land because that's been lost so many generations ago from wherever they came. And so there's this huge sense of loss, and they become a bit nerdy. And I was thinking, oh Jesus, what else do you want? But also the flip side of that is by going through that process, realising they don't have it, but realising how they can find that connection to country, to being, it's like how I describe my children, their role. They were born on Wiradjuri land. They will never own the land will always own them, So finding comfort for non-Indigenous people and a way of actually building, nation building for the Wiradjuri to unite people.
Can I say that some of the students who do the best are the community people who've grown up in their communities, haven't been a standard success at school, in a school sense, felt like they were failures at school, and some of them are the best translators we've ever had through the course. They're the distinctions and HDs, Lloyd, and it's just beautiful, and how they're the multipliers. They go back in their community and they're working in all sorts of spaces, and the police in one community got one of the elders who came through, exceptional translator, and got him to work with some of the kids that they couldn't connect, and said, I've never ever seen those kids engage and be so switched on by anyone ever before. Can you keep working with them? So there's a lot of demands on the students as soon as they start, isn't there, Lloyd? Like they're always, language is so transformational, it's just incredible, and it has the most beautiful sacred concepts in it. And those sacred teachings are what we can't lose. It's what the world needs now more than ever before. It's really beautiful and multiplied.
And I think it's interesting to watch with the students, regardless of their background, where they're coming from. So, when we do have classes, in which people are talking about there's elders in there, and we've got senior elders in there, and you're meant to be teaching them. It is that challenge, but it's always interesting to watch. We never tee up and connect this student who's, and we've had professors and associate professors and people are learning their sixth language. We don't marry them up with a student and go, oh, you need to work with this one because you've got all this academic skills and you can help them. People do that. People find out and go, okay, I need some help with computers. I think that Leonie over there, she's pretty deadly with that. I might catch up with her later. And they do, they set up their own little relationships and networks, and I think that's why so many people get through. It's not because of what we're doing, it's what they're actually doing with each other and how those relationships are actually forming over that period. So then, when Leonie doesn't come to class, it's not me as the teacher on the phone worrying about where she is. There's 6 other people in the group that know what's happening with Leonie and where she is and taking notes for her and checking up. And it's a different way of being in terms of a university classroom setting that doesn't marry when you walk up into another lecture theatre and our class isn't operating that way.
I think the discussion around the trauma of non-Indigenous students who come into the course highlights something really important. Quite often if we talk about recovering from colonisation, everyone looks at the First Nations people and forget that the non-Indigenous people are just as affected, if not more affected, by the trauma of colonisation than First Nations people. And the reason why I say if not more, it's because it's erased from their memory. And so we as First Nations people, we live with it. It's there every day. We know what it is. We can see it, we smell it, we touch it, we feel the full impact of it. But for people who aren't carrying the memory, when that memory starts to surface, it hits really, really hard. And so recovering from colonisation is about everybody. We live in a colonised society. Everyone has to recover, and it's that relational thing. One side of us can work really, really hard in that relationship to recover from that trauma, but if the other side's not working from it, that disease will continue to fester, and we will continue to be infected by colonisation. And so recovery from colonisation takes everyone to do that. And I think that for some of the non-Indigenous students who come into the course, even though they're not consciously in, maybe some individuals are, but the majority certainly aren't thinking about it from that way, I think that they've come into it wanting to recover from that trauma of colonisation themselves and to find their place in this country, to find where they belong, how they connect, and what their relationship is back to country and back to, in this case, Wiradjuri.
I mean, I think just picking up a bit around that is, also the issue around how much energy we have and where it's best placed. And so, I like attaching that to the idea of now you've got a job. Because actually, I think that in our context, so we have a lot of Pākehā people and Pacific people and Māori people learning Māori language. And there's something different about learning language, just to speak it and communicate, and learning language to understand your place and your positionality and your role. And that's what we try to emphasise, is that actually this language is a gift from our ancestors and we're sharing it with you. And that's fine, but never use it against us. And you've got a job to do, because now in this relation, in that kind of relationship, and it's the whole thing around everything is relational, that we all, in these relationships, we all have obligations and responsibilities to each other that come with the relationships. And so I'm kind of, in our work, so to be honest, we do very little work with non-Māori people, unless other Indigenous people or Pacific Nations people. Why? Because all of the issues that, on the research we're doing has come out of our communities, and it's all about Māori cultural understanding for Māori well-being. And so that requires a particular team of people to work in those areas. And so there's very few Pākehā white New Zealand people that have the knowledge and language and skill to be able to work in those areas. And so it's a bit like, people on country and community excel because we come with a particular kind of knowledge set that enables us to fulfill the requirements and the needs and the pathways and the knowledge and the language that comes with a particular research project that we're doing. So for example, one project we're doing at the moment is the wellbeing of Takatapu, which is the wellbeing of Māori LGBTQI communities, multiple communities. And so we're working with groups of Māori that are Takatapu, that are, that is their life, that is their community, they're all researchers, and they bring, so that's an even specific skill set inside a Māori community. And so, you know, I think that there are, I like the idea of now you've got a job, I can't remember that right now, you know, I remind people now they've got a job to do. And, but, you know, there is something kind of, whose role is it to then heal the descendants of our colonisers? Whose role is it then when the trauma comes up? And I get in a language class that there are frameworks that happens in, right? But I've seen it myself. But I think that there's also a role for others to then step into that space to help that kind of healing happen, so we can continue to put our energy into our own communities. And so that's where the allyship, and I keep thinking about just Three Rivers, you know, what does this relationship mean and how do you work that? And I think that there are, you know, there's been a lot of sharing, I think, today that actually gives a whole lot of indicators to work towards how that can work. And the strength of community relationships that already exist in this group of people, in this institution, who are also community. But what are the roles of people? So if we were working, we're often asked by other organisations to partner with them in their projects. And so the first question that I will ask is, you know, so when you say partner, are you talking about co-PI level of community with the organisation? And often they'll say, oh, no, we just want our own community partner, which is at another layer. And so I just say no. No, we're not. And we're not asking any of our communities to partner with them. So come back when you're really talking about a real partnership or a real co-production, and then we'll have another conversation about it. And for me, that's a Kaupapa Māori way of doing things. We're talking about meaningful relationships where the power in the relationship is shared. That is a true power sharing relationship. And actually, when I hear about what you do in the language program, it's really clear to me Indigenous people know how to power share. We already know how to do it. And it's a bit like brown people I talked a little bit about yesterday. The treaty relationship. And as I said, I've heard a lot of discourse around the idea of a treaty here. And that is your business in terms of what you do. But please don't look to our treaty as a model, because it is not a model of power sharing. And I know that it gets put out in the international sphere as if it's this wonderful relationship, this wonderful, honourable relationship in treaties. But actually our relationship in terms of our treaty is that it remains unhonoured, and it's been reduced to this notion of a neoliberal economic settlement model. And when I hear it getting promoted with other Indigenous nations as this great model for how things can be done, you know, I get really concerned because, and I hear our people talk about it in that way too. But our treaty has never been honoured. And I said yesterday, Moana Jackson, a legal activist, Māori activist lawyer at home, has always said treaties are made to be honoured, treaties are not made to be settled, treaties are made to be honoured. So any treaty relationship is really reliant, and any co-partnering relationship, any co-production relationship, any decolonising methodology relationship requires an honourable power sharing that is real and meaningful. It's about resources, it's about knowledge, it's about methodology, it's about methods, it's about language, it's about all of these things. That's when you have, and so there's a lot of work that has to be done by all of us to get to that point. And you know, I think we're really fortunate. In fact, I know the University of Waikato is very fortunate that, you know, 18 to 19 tribal groups are willing to come in every few months and meet with them to discuss what is happening in the university, to talk about what their research aspirations are, to talk about what their needs are, to challenge the university for its bad behaviour when it behaves badly. I know we're being recorded, but universities behave badly a lot, you know, and so it's good to have that group of elders or representatives who come in and do that in a lot of ways to keep Māori staff safe and to keep Māori students safe. So when we are talking about things like developing co-collections that are able to ground Indigenous research aspirations and be a part of that, there's a lot of work to be done. And it takes time, and we have to be patient with that and walk carefully. One of the things that I was told when I first travelled by one of our elders was when you go to Indigenous lands, you walk carefully on those lands. Yeah, and it actually took me a while to work out what that meant. Yeah. And it's because we leave our footprints everywhere, you know? And we want it to be something that's about, yeah, it's about being careful and walking gently and carefully on other people's lands. Respectfully. Living respectfully in a world we want to live in. So it's going to be a new philosophy of life.
We just did a quick presentation on behalf of Indigenous Student Centres, and we've got this right here. Thank you so much for today. Just a
I want to thank all of you for joining us here today, and in particular, I'd like to thank Leonie for sharing with us her experiences and her knowledge. It certainly has provided me with a lot of food for thought, and I'm certain for many of you, a lot of what Leonie has said has resonated with what's happening for you. Deb, thank you for your participation here today and your work in bringing this session together. Susan, thank you for organising all of this. Blake and Boyd and the rest of the staff from the Centre here, thank you so much for having us here today. Lunch, we're going to have lunch, and I'm certain conversations will